If you're a property investor, you probably want to maximise your rental returns. Well, of course you want to maximise your rental returns. And while over the last couple of years, you've most likely enjoyed strong capital growth, moving forward, it's likely we're going to have much more subdued growth, meaning getting better rentals is going to be even more important than ever. So how do you do this without losing tenants? That's what I'm going to chat about today with Leanne Jopson, National Director of Property Management at Metropole, so that at the end of today's podcast, you'll have some hints about how, when, and how much you can increase your rents. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
As a property investor, I'm sure you're keen to maximise your returns, and one way to maximise them is to increase your rental returns. Of course, one way of achieving this is owning the best properties in the best locations and leasing them to tenants who are able to pay higher rents. And if you've been listening to my podcast, you'd know we avoid buying investment properties in areas where tenants are only 1 or 2 weeks away from broke. And they're the sort of properties where you're going to have difficulty increasing your rents, even if your costs increase, because the tenants are not going to be able to afford to pay more. Now, of course, this isn't a judge of people, but if you're looking at new housing estates or cheaper, affordable suburbs, in general, people are renting there because they have to, because they've got no choice, while a third of Australians are tenants, and many of them are renting just because of lifestyle choices or the stage of their life they're at, and they can afford to pay to be in good locations or good properties. Anyway, having said all that, let's understand how you can maximise your rental returns as I have a chat with Leanne Jopson, National Director of Property Management at Metropole, who's got more than 20 years' experience as a property manager and for the last long time now, overseeing our property management division at Metropole. In fact, overseeing more than $2 billion worth of assets for our clients. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Michael.
Now, Leanne, you're a property investor yourself and been looking after property investors and property management for a long time. And as we've chatted and as you advise our clients along the way, I know you believe there are two recurring intervals with the investment property's life cycle where you can proactively boost your property's rental return. What are they?
Basically, you've got two opportunities to increase rents. One is by way of improvements, typically done between tenancies, so when the property is naturally going to be becoming vacant. And the other option is obviously through your regular rental increases that happen during a tenancy.
Sure. Well, let's work through a couple of examples. So, you know, we like the concept of manufacturing capital growth by improving properties through renovations or development, but also you can improve your rental yields, can't you?
Absolutely. There are lots of ways to do that. Now, typically, yes, you do that when the property is vacant. So when one tenant vacates and the next one before the next one comes in, and we're looking to improve the property through renovation or redevelopment or refurbishment.
So how do you know what tenants want? I mean, that's a good way to start, isn't it? Finding out what your target market would like.
One of the best ways to find out what your tenant wants is to ask them. You can also look at those unique features that are being advertised in other properties as well, but definitely your relationship that the property manager has with your tenant and opening up those discussions can really help you know what a tenant is looking for.
Now, let's make it clear. You ask the tenants, but that's not for you, me, the investor to do. That's why you've got a good property manager who's dealing with them all the time and knows what's going on. So we're not suggesting you deal directly with tenants or potential tenants.
No, that can actually be a recipe for disaster. Again, it's not just asking your tenant, but also tenants in the area, and you're going to get that experience from your property manager or those answers from your property manager. If your property manager is out there and your property is in Bentley and they're seeing people that are out in the rental market every week in Bentley and all of them are looking for a coffee machine, then we know that a coffee machine is going to be something good to put into a property.
So after all, as a landlord, it's easy to get up and throw good money after bad when it comes to improving your property. Now, interestingly though, Leanne, I believe there are a couple of fundamentals that in the old days people didn't require that you really should consider in between tenancies if you haven't got one. I mean, air conditioning today is almost as important as having a toilet, to be blunt, but also dishwashers are valuable, and other amenities. What do tenants look for?
Absolutely. Heating, air conditioning, dishwashers, built-in robes. Many, many years ago, if we were having this conversation, we would have said, make sure that the toilet's not outdoors. Now, if you tried to lease a property outdoors, it would have to come with, I don't know, some historical relevance, because we just can't do that. But essentially, we're looking for those what used to be luxury items are now keys. We need dishwashers, we need built-in robes, we need air conditioning. In Victoria, it's now mandatory for heating in the living areas. So there's all those kind of must-haves to really make your property attractive.
If you think about it, tenants look on realestate.com domain, have a look and see what other properties there, and you're competing with all those new apartments and houses and townhouses that have got those as standard. So it's a good opportunity to bring them up to scratch. Now, some people are going to say, oh, but I don't want to spend the money. But if you run your properties as a business, if you have a shop, you'd have to upgrade the shop front. You'd have to keep the latest stock that people want. I guess there are occasionally landlords who just can't see the value in it.
Yes, that's true. And then you've got to be realistic about the rents and the vacancy rates that's going to get you. If you're not keeping up with the market's not going to keep up with you. And by failing to do those things, we're going to fail to get the higher rents. You're going to spend more time on the market and ultimately more days vacant. And lots of people forget that is probably the single biggest cost to an investor, vacancy.
Yes, it is. So consider offering those items. I think the other thing is you should consider renovating your property over time. So carpets have a lifespan, paint does have a lifespan. It's time occasionally to upgrade the kitchens and bathrooms. That probably only is every 25 years or so. But sometimes it's actually costing you money not to make things up to date.
Absolutely. Improvements can come in all shapes and sizes. We talk about refurbishment, we talk about presentation maintenance, and then we get to renovation. A well-planned renovation will, of course, increase the asking rents, but it can also mean a significant amount of outlay, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be a super expensive renovation with all the bells and whistles when, maybe a coat of paint or the new carpets like you're talking about will be a lot to refresh the property. It's also important if you are on a limited budget, and just because you may want to spend it and just not be able to at that time, it's important then to focus on the things that need to be fixed, the absolute must-haves, and that street appeal. So if you get to the front gate and it's falling off, that's a distraction. If you get to the front door and the locks don't work, that's a problem. And so start with the things that a tenant absolutely must have first if you've got a limited budget, and work out from there.
You don't get a second chance to make that good first impression, do you?
Not at all. But it is also important that we're looking for those features that tenants actually want. So just like the dishwasher and the air conditioning that we've just spoken about, I think the other thing that's important to remember is that we're not trying to put features in there that tenants don't want, because you can throw good money after bad. We joke about it. Ducted heating, major feature in Melbourne, not so much a feature in Darwin. And that's where we've got to be quite careful.
Also, it's nice to have something a bit unique, a bit special, a bit different about your property to compare it with others. But that also comes right from the beginning when we first select the property. If you can get 2 car spaces in where everyone's got one, or off-street parking if you're in one of the inner suburbs where in general it's on-street parking. Now, there's sometimes things you can add, but occasionally you can't. Nowadays, it's just the way people live as well. And adding an al fresco living area, indoor-outdoor living, makes a big difference as well.
Popping a shade sail across the back deck, allowing for a swing set in the backyard to be anchored correctly if you've got a family home. Very simple improvements that can really benefit your rental yield.
Now, another way, of course, is making your property more attractive to a wider range of tenants. I've always been a pet-friendly landlord, as you know. In fact, in many ways, I'd rather have pets than young kids. They tend to cause less damage. What are the laws about pets nowadays in Australia, Leanne?
Well, in most states now, you actually cannot stop a tenant from having a pet, or you've got to have a very good reason to stop having a pet. Having said that, we all know, especially if you've got a family-orientated property, that these days families have designer pets. It's not exactly, the pets of old. They're very much a family member, and it's important to include them because you will exclude tenants if you don't.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, so one of the things you said was at one time to increase your rents or consider increasing them and getting advice is in between tenants, and that's a good time to improve your property. But what about rent reviews? Because to be blunt, the last couple of years, rents have stagnated. Now, sure, property investors have had the benefit of rising property values, but you can't bank those. And so, therefore, now the world has changed, and all of a sudden, rents have gone up. Vacancies are at the lowest they've been for a long, long time. So, what's your hints about increasing rents at rent review time?
The little and often method to increase rent, so increasing the rent every 6 or 12 months as the legislation allowed, used to be the most successful way to hang on to good tenants and keep rental returns increasing. The thinking used to be that each of these small incremental increases would help your tenants with their affordability, meaning that they were less likely to jump ship. And certainly cost of living is a really big discussion at the moment. Since the COVID pandemic, though, things have changed because we saw rents stagnate and fall backwards. We were all very sensitive to tenant losses during
Oh, yes.
that time. And, it's a statistical fact that rents went down, not up, unless you were lucky enough to be on the Mornington Peninsula where everybody wanted to go on holidays and they skyrocketed. But essentially, we've been through a really difficult time in the last two years. Again, we've had a few changes in legislation where even if you're on a periodic lease, that you can still only increase the rent once every 12 months now. And in fact, that's now common across most states that it's 12 monthly rental increases. So we also kind of need to consider what's going to happen in the next 12 months within reason. And as I'm sure you would agree, all the market predictors there is that we're going to see rapid rental rates as supply and demand changes. There's going to be fewer properties available and more people wanting them, which will force those rental rates up.
Now, people are asking actually, what about rising interest rates? Is that going to change rental rates? And it has nothing to do with interest rates dropping or calming the price growth. Rentals have nothing to do with that. They really have to do with supply and demand, don't they, Leanne?
They do. It's basic supply and demand, nothing to do with interest rates. Although I did like it when interest rates were falling, tenants thought that was a reason for us to give them rental discounts. It doesn't quite work like that.
No, it doesn't. My experience is that rents rarely fall unless vacancy rates head towards around 3% and stay elevated for a period of time. But they also show little growth until vacancy rates fall below around 2%, which is actually happening at the moment. But you can't just increase the rent because you want to. You've got to actually time it correctly, don't you, Leanne?
Absolutely. And again, a lot of that comes back to legislation. But I think going to the point, before it was little and often. Now it's really about the math, the timing, and the legislation. So you can only increase your rents once every 12 months. You must do it via a prescribed means, and you must give, in most states, a reason for increasing the rent or some comparable market analysis.
Now, I know, unfortunately, though, tenants are complaining, and we've actually discussed that just only last week with one of my tenants, where the rent was stagnant for a long period of time, and now all of a sudden there was a rent increase of about 20%. Having said that, there was lots of good comparables, and this tenant unfortunately complained to the property manager saying, but my wages haven't gone up. Now, that is unfortunate, but I'm not sure she can use that excuse when she goes to buy petrol. I'm not sure she can use that excuse when she goes to Coles and says, hey, but the cost of all these goods has gone up as well. So what is it that one needs to show to prove that it's okay to increase the rent?
It is comparative market analysis. So if your tenant is living in a 4-bedroom house in Bentley or a 4-bedroom house in Coogee, what is a similar property in the same street or very close by at a similar level of renovation currently being leased for? Again, because of the rapid change that we're seeing, it's also important that we not look at not just what's happened in the last 3 or 6 months, but also look at what's happening in the marketplace right now, because that supply and demand issue has changed quite significantly in the last 90 days.
Sure. So you've really got to be up to date with what's going on. And what right then does a tenant have to say, no, I won't pay extra rent?
So in just about every state, there's no limit of how much you can increase the rent by. But just about in every state, even if you increase it by $1, a tenant can actually lodge a complaint or a request for independent assessment.
So what is the process then? How can I increase the rent?
So typically what you would do is you would get a market analysis, determine what it is, the amount that...
Which your property manager should be
Absolutely.
doing for you.
Your property manager should be looking at that and suggesting a rental increase. Now, again, it can come back to timing. There's some properties that you don't want to increase right now because they're in a school zone and you're better off waiting until school goes back. Or for argument's sake, you live on a beachside suburb, you want to time the increases for summer. Again, because you can only increase the rent once every 12 months. So you want to do it when your comparables are at their maximum. But yes, your property manager should be giving you an indication of what the rent should be, and then it's a matter of going to the tenant and putting that rent forward. Now, in many cases, the tenants are just as savvy as they know they've already considered what's happening in the area, and sometimes they will be accepting of that rent. Sometimes they'll want to negotiate a little bit, and sometimes they will be unhappy. Now, again, that's when I'm coming back to the math. You really have to do the calculation, because when we're talking about rental increases of $5 or $10 a week, losing a tenant, paying a leasing fee, having a vacancy, probably not worth it.
No.
Exactly. Probably not worth it. However, in a rapidly rising market, which what we're seeing now and what we predict is going to happen in the next few months, you may well want to increase the rent and really do the math. Yes, that tenant may vacate, and that's unfortunate. But if you are confident, and your property manager can certainly give you some indications here, but if you are confident that we're going to release it, and we're going to release it quickly at $50 or $60 a week more, in some cases much more. And again, this is why you need your property manager to give you suburb, even street-specific advice at times. Then it's well worth it. And yes, it's sad, but it may be financially your best decision to have that tenant vacate. Now, again, they can object, and you'll go through that analysis period where your rental will be independently assessed. You'll be asked to justify.
So who do they object to, Leanne?
So again, it depends on which state, but they can apply to, depending on the state, they can apply to NCAT, VCAT, Consumer Affairs, Fair Trade.
So a tribunal, really.
Yeah. And in most cases, they get that assessed, and there's a discussion between the person that's doing the assessment, the tenant, and the landlord's representative, and they'll look to negotiate make a decision. Sometimes you are given a ruling at that point. You can, if you wish, also take the matter all the way through to the appropriate VCAT, NCAT, QCAT, and actually have a judgment passed by a member. Again, I'd recommend negotiation, but also holding your ground.
So once you've worked out that you are able to increase the rent, you actually need to provide written notice, because you can't increase the rent from tomorrow, can you?
No. In just about every state, the notice period is 60 days plus service. Now, what that means is it's 60 days for the actual notice period, but you have to allow a couple of days between preparing the notice and the tenant actually getting the notice. In most cases now, these days, that's done by electronic, so via email, and it's quite quick. If you still have somebody that has not consented to electronic, it can be 5 or 6 business days, because you still need to go back to registered post.
I guess it's also worth assuming if you are going to do a large rent increase, that the tenant may object. So your property manager should really present the tenant with all the right information, the amount of increase, the date, but also the comparable details that they've given you, just to save the time and trouble of having all those arguments.
Yes, indeed. Your property manager should actually be preparing you for that argument. And let's be fair, there will be an argument. Michael, I've been a property manager for over 20 years. I've never had a tenant come to me and go, "Oh, thank you so much for that rental increase." Never happened. Nobody's ever happy about an increase in price. But it is about working out what's the best increase for price financially for the actual property itself. So getting the best market return, but not to the point where you've lost that increase in rent because of vacancy or costs.
Makes sense. Now, just talking about property managers, obviously we have a vested interest with you looking after a national team of property managers, and we've been in the industry for a long time. But I believe they play a huge role in the success of your property investment business, how they handle repairs, how they look after tenants, the advice they give them. Because I guess my gut feeling is if they've built up rapport and a relationship with the tenant's more likely to accept their suggestion than if they've been adversarial right from day one.
Correct. There's a couple of things there. We spoke earlier on about how renovation and property improvements can be, a great way to increase your rent. Having a property manager that happens to know that the tenant wants the place set in the back veranda, or has complained to them about how it's really hot coming in the back windows, the sunlight coming into the back windows, those little improvements can help you retain a tenant and also make them feel more comfortable with a rental increase. So that's really important. It's also that the tenant may come back, or the renter may come back to the property manager and say, "Hey, I can't quite stretch to $50, but I can do 40." And then it's a $10 difference, and you'd always keep a good long-term tenant, as we said, over the sake of $5 or $10. But if you just send them a notice saying, "Hi, your rent's going up by $50," and you don't have that relationship between property manager and tenant, that can be an issue, and you've unnecessarily incurred those costs.
Now, apart from collecting rents, property managers do a lot more. I know a lot of potential landlords and even current landlords think, "Oh, it's a waste of money. Why should I pay the property manager?" When things are going well and everything's going smoothly, I'm sure you can collect the rents yourself, but there's so much more to it. I know that property management's a continual conveyor belt of challenges and of problems, and I see the property managers tear their hair out. And I've also seen that employing an experienced property manager actually maximizes your returns. But in summary, why would somebody pay a little bit extra to get an industry leading property manager?
Because quite frankly, collecting rent is the least that you need, or the last thing you need a property manager to be concentrating on. Well, yes, they need the rent to come in, but really in this day and age, that's a matter about setting up a BPay or a direct debit and making sure that's coming in. It's all the other things that you can get stuck on. It is, again, as we've just said, biggest cost to an investor is actually vacancy. So not having a good relationship with your tenant can actually cost you via vacancy and tenant turnover. It's the loss of rent. So by not maintaining your property successfully, by not keeping to the minimum standards, you can end up having to significantly compensate your tenant. So it's all the hidden costs. It's not so much about collecting the rent, it's about keeping the rent.
It's also about understanding the legislation. What was there? 130 changes to the legislation in Victoria last year alone, and it's happened in other states as well.
Absolutely. Every state has had some kind of impact in the changes in bills and legislation that have come through about COVID. But we've actually seen changes in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria specifically. Yes, Victoria's but definitely the most. But we've seen additional changes, not just COVID-related changes to the legislation throughout that time period. We've talked about heaps of them today insofar as minimum standards, heating requirements, the allowance of pets. There's a whole quagmire of legislative detail that you need to work through. I mean, if you don't serve the rent increase in the appropriate way at the appropriate time, it's invalid. So it's not as straightforward as one would think.
Now, also, the properties have to come up to a particular standard, and you can't hide from that fact anymore. See, most property managers keep up to date with this, and clearly our team does as well. So if you think you can do that, you probably don't realise how complicated things are. So I believe to manage your property and minimise vacancies and maximise your returns, you need somebody who's got industry-specific skills and knowledge. Apart from just knowing what's happening in the current market, you've got to have big picture knowledge, but they've also got to be exposed to a large number of tenants and hear what's going on. Setting rents at appropriate level is hard nowadays when there aren't as many vacancies around, and it's important to know not just what the asking rents other people have put up, but also what's actually been achieved. Checking tenants' references is something I know we take very seriously at Metropole, but I know others seem to skimp past this and just accept anyone, Leanne.
Absolutely, and there's a couple of reasons why we're quite interested in those references. And I often get asked, why do we ask for a personal reference? Why do we ask for the reference from the mum or the dad or the auntie? There's two things in that. One, we need to know the story. Again, vacancy is the biggest cost to a landlord. So we really want to make sure that these are likely to be long-term tenants that suit the property. We also, though, really want to make sure of the affordability of calculations, because we've all seen what happens when a tenant can't afford the rent. And just as you were talking in the introduction, we want to make sure that we've actually engaged or chosen a tenant that has some flexibility in that they're not spending their last dollar on rent. That if interest rates were to change, if inflation does go up, if a different party gets in at the election, that they still have some flexibility and in their ability to pay the rent. So those references are really important.
I think the other thing is, even if you choose a good tenant, sometimes good tenants become bad tenants. Families break up, drugs, health, other issues get involved. And so even if they start off well, that's when you need somebody to look after your interests and protect your interests, understand the legislation. Of course, there's all the other stuff as well: lodging bonds, handling repairs and maintenance, getting them done in a timely manner and not too expensive, paying your insurances and outgoings, keeping up to date with the complex legislation. I think it's important to understand what a property manager does. It's not an easy job, Leanne.
No, it's not. If it was, everybody would be doing it, and not everybody is. We've also seen that as quite a change in the industry, where being a property manager has become quite difficult, and it's really important that we stick to the policies and procedures to help us run those portfolios.
Now, clearly, almost every estate agency has a property management department, but in my mind, it's important to have a property management department, a dedicated department with specific staff that's not just the poor cousin of the salespeople who make the big commissions.
Absolutely. One of the things that are specific to Metropole is that we are managing a property to a strategic plan. So we are looking at things like vacancy. We are looking at things like turnover of tenant. If you've got an estate agent, a straight estate agent, they like turning over your tenants every 12 months because it means that there's a letting fee coming in every 12 months.
They also like selling the properties off their rent roll, don't they? Because they make a bigger commission. Boy, did we see this last year, Leanne. All these people who were approached by estate agents knocking on their door saying, can we sell your investment property? And some of them made the foolish mistake of accepting.
Absolutely. When somebody that owns an investment property comes to a sales agent and saying, I'm having a drama with my tenant, one of the first things they're going to say is, have you had a recent appraisal? Could we look at selling it for you if it's causing you that much drama? It's not in their interest to help you maintain the investment. It's actually in their interest to sell the property for you. Now, I'm not saying that that's always the case, and there are very good estate agents in there, but I think managing to a plan is really important. Equally, it's understanding that and balancing out those frustrations that you might be feeling, so that you're not making, and to quote you, Michael, you're not making 30-year decisions based on the last 30 seconds of news.
So I guess what I'm suggesting is, if you have an investment property in Melbourne, Sydney or Brisbane, our market at Metropole, and if you'd like the same property manager who looks after my property, look after yours, why not have a chat with them? Go to metropole.com.au, have a look at the property management department and just leave your details, or you can leave it on any of the contact forms and we'll be in contact with you. Because I know, Leanne, you did an audit recently, and we were audited, and we saw that we had a vacancy rate less than the market averages. Our tenants stayed longer than the average, and we leased properties faster than the market average. And that was even during the challenging times of COVID. But the fact that our tenants stayed on average longer meant fewer vacancies, more money in the pocket of our landlords.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of that is about the relationship that you're building. And it's not just with the property manager themselves or individually, it's with the team. We've had, tenants at Metropole that have actually done 3 years in one property and then another 4 years in another property because they like Metropole, they like that relationship. It's not necessarily with the same property manager, but yes, it's the same receptionist or the same trust accountant. It's the team that are putting it all together.
I think a team's important because we know property managers change jobs. So we have the most up-to-date accounting and property management systems to look after the properties. And then we have the best property managers and teams to look after the tenants and the properties and our clients. So if you'd like Leanne Jopson to help you and her team to help you maximize your rental returns, or if you're wondering, hey, is my rent what I should be getting, go to metropole.com.au, click on the Property Management tab under the Services section there and leave us your details and we'll be in contact with you, or I'll leave a link in the show notes. Thank you for your time, Leanne. It's actually a good time to be a landlord because our properties have gone up in value and now our rents are going up. Hey, what more can we ask?
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me, Michael, and I hope this has been of assistance to our clients.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leanne. In a moment, I'm going to have a chat with Tom Corley about an interesting lesson that he learned. It just reinforces some of the rich habits that he and I talk about in our book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. But before I do, just following on our discussion with Leanne Jopson, I think you can see the benefit of having somebody with that type of knowledge on your side to level the playing field as a property investor. So if you'd like the same property manager who looks after my properties to look after yours, why not go to metropole.com.au and leave a note on the contact page, or go to the property management page and leave your question there as well, or your details, and we'll be in contact with you. Now, it's interesting what's happening in the world of property at the moment, isn't it? Have you been, over the last couple of years, have you done well through property? I mean, despite all the boom and gloom, some property investors found the last couple of years to be a great time, enabling them to take advantage of the opportunities the market presented. But now, things are a bit different, aren't they? The world is changing in front of our eyes, interest rates going up, all the scary suggestions about what's going to happen moving forward. Interestingly, these are the times when, in the past, strategic property investors, people with a long-term view, have done the best when there hasn't been as much competition around. The last couple of years have been a great experience to allow us to stress test the strategies that we use at Metropole to help our clients and ourselves develop financial success, even through challenging times. So if you want to understand what your options are, go to metropole.com.au and find out about what we do and leave us your details. Because remember, wealth doesn't just happen. You've got to plan for it. And in my mind, you have to invest in your future because you're going to be spending a long time living there. So what shifts are you going to need to make today to be ready for the changing property and economic environment? I don't know. I don't know your circumstances. Maybe you just need a portfolio health check to see how your current portfolio is going. Maybe you need to review your finance strategy. Maybe you need to see a financial planner or a property strategist or a wealth advisor. Well, we can help you at Metropole because we don't sell property, so our advice is independent and holistic. Go to metropole.com.au. I'd love to be part of your wealth creation journey. Rather than my normal solo mindset session, which I run at the end of most shows, today I'm going to have a chat with my good friend Tom Corley, international best-selling author and co-author of my international best-selling book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. We're going to have a chat about a lesson he learned from his Aunt Peg. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Michael. How you doing, my friend? It's good to see you.
I loved a recent blog, an article that you write every day, where you actually talked about your Aunt Peg and a lesson that you learned from her. Maybe you could share it again with us.
Yeah, so I've written about this often because it was something I came up in my data, but the title of the article is Not Every Thought Needs to Come Out of Your Mouth. It was interesting because my Aunt Peg, who I loved dearly, she was a character, Michael. I mean, slow gin fizzes. I had my first sip of alcohol because of my Aunt Peg, a slow gin fizz. Anyway, she was so much fun to be around and entertaining. But one of the things she would do consistently is if she had a thought, it would come right out of her mouth. And it didn't matter if it was friends or neighbors, she would say things. And sometimes they were offensive. Now, as a kid, Michael, I got a kick out of this. I got a charge out of it because I knew my Aunt Peg was going to say something, that would make people cringe. And she would do it all the time. And I would just like to watch the reaction of people. Well,
we all know somebody like that.
Yeah. And, if you're a kid, you get a kick out of it. I always admired her because of it. I always thought my Aunt Peg speaks her mind. She always used to say, I speak my mind and I'm proud of it. And I always thought that was a positive attribute, something that you should have. And it wasn't until, I guess, my Aunt Peg passed away and we had the funeral. And in the funeral, we have a large family. So our family was there. But that was pretty much it, Michael. There were two people that used to work with my Aunt Peg. Out of all of the people that she knew, there were only two friends that had the consideration to show up. And I really thought long and hard about that after the funeral. And I remember talking to my wife, Denise, about it. And I said, I think my Aunt Peg offended so many people that they had no desire to celebrate her passing. They were probably glad that she was dead. And I thought about it and I thought about it. And then I guess, when I started doing my Rich Habits research, when I started analyzing the data, one of the things that came up, it's a data point, was that 94% of the wealthy in my study said it was a bad habit to say what's on your mind. In other words, 94% of the wealthy vetted the thoughts before the thoughts became words. They made sure whatever was coming out of their mouth was well thought out. And I thought this brought me back to my Aunt Peg. It really did. And I said, oh my God, this is something I thought, it just flew in the face of what I believed was an attribute, a positive attribute. Speaking your mind. A lot of people, in fact, 69% of the poor believe that speaking your mind is a positive attribute. Well, the wealthy don't. They don't. They think that speaking your mind is the fast track to destroying relationships that you hone over many years. Now, most of the wealthy are forging relationships with I call them influencers. These are people that are door openers. They can get you new clients. They can get your kids into college and all these things. Well, in their mind, they're like, I'm not going to screw this relationship up. And I'm going to be very careful of the words that come out of my mouth. And because they had this rich habit, they were able to maintain and grow these strong relationships with influencers. Now, the Aunt Pegs out there were destroying relationships. They're destroying them with their speaking your mind habit, which is a poor habit. It's not something you should do. It's bad. And I didn't know this until I did my research. To be honest, I was in my 40s when I figured this out.
So it's really interesting that it's just another way that the rich people think differently to the average person. And it's not a judge of people, but clearly words are important. How you communicate is important. If you do it right, it can help build relationships. It can help get you to the next level. If you do it wrong, unfiltered words can destroy relationships. And I know you've done a lot of study your Rich Habits initial study and then written about it. And we together have written about it in Rich Habits, Poor Habits. So if people want to find out more about it, just go to richhabitspoorhabits.com and get a copy of our international bestseller book. Tom, it's doing really well all around the world, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, isn't it?
Oh, especially in China. I mean, I think we've probably are approaching 70, 80,000 copies in China, right? That's a big deal. And we've only been in there for 2 years.
So once again, why not learn the habits of the rich people and change your life by the way you change your thinking? Thanks, Tom. We'll catch up again real soon.
Looking forward to it, Michael. Thank you.
I hope you've got some insights from Leanne Jopson about rents. Of course, you need a great property manager as part of your team, and we'd love to help you by looking after your assets like we do so many other clients at Metropole. But if you actually got some benefit from the chat with Leanne and you know somebody else who'd benefit, and any other property investors, please tell them about this podcast. You can also tell the world by leaving a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever you listen to this. That'd be great. Now, I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me on social media in between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney. I've also got a bonus for you. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au. We've got a heap of reports and ebooks that you can get. Just my way of saying thank you for being part of this community. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?